So my name is Lloyd Hoshaw. I'm the AP Lang teacher of our presentation. I've been teaching about 19 years, AP Lang for 9. We've been in a combo situation for 4 years where we'll share some more of that with you. We teach at Millard West High School, which is a suburban high school outside of Omaha, Nebraska. To set up the way that we do a project in class that connects synthesis to DBQ. It's a book that we're going to tell you more about called The Rhythm Boys of Omaha Central. And what we're excited about is not just the content, although we could probably talk about that for an hour anyway, but it's the actual project that we have the students do. And it is the intersection between the AP language synthesis and the AP history DBQ kind of questions. But we think what makes this maybe interesting or different than maybe some of the things we've done in the past, certainly I didn't do it the first few years I taught AP Lang, is that these are going to be student-created synthesis or DBQ questions. And so we're going to share that with you. We are going to give some background information on the text so that you can understand how we're setting it up. But we strongly encourage conversation, questions, ideas throughout the presentation. There's some stuff that we're happy to share with you, but I think we'll learn just as much from you as anything we might be able to share from our own experience. But mostly what we are concerned about today is moving past that writing aspect and talking about flipping that synthesis kind of question. Instead of talking to them as writers responding, we're asking our students to probably do what most of you have done as the teacher, is have them create a synthesis question. Go on the other side of it and figure out how do you put together an interesting, challenging packet of documents that deal with a real issue and present an argument in a way that's engaging and relevant. And so for us to do that, we've selected a core nonfiction text. The book that we've selected is The Rhythm Boys of Omaha Central, which is a book written by Steve Morantz. And kind of the basic background, which we're going to spend a little time with for context for you, is that we look at this book as, since we teach outside in a suburban school of Omaha, it makes obvious sense. Oh, this is about Omaha. But we're able to look at it through the lens of now, and then 1968 is in the book, and how we can kind of start to bridge that gap and see what is similar and what is different between those time periods in our own city. And to us, that's what makes it a relevant text. So we're going to talk to you about it so that you can understand where we're going with this project. But what I want you to do is start thinking about your communities and your students. And what is the text that would open up opportunities for them to discuss what's really happening around them in your communities. And for us, it's the Rhythm Boys. But for you, it might be something else. And for us, since it was essentially open, they had African-American starters on the basketball team since the 1940s, but in 1968, they became the first Nebraska high school in which all 5 starters were African-American. It's also 1968 in America. It's 1968, and George Wallace is running for president on the stance of segregation. And about 1 week before the basketball tournament is supposed to start, George Wallace stops in Omaha for a campaign rally at the Civic Auditorium, a block away from their school. When he comes, there is protest, there is violence that happens at the rally, and then there are several days of riots in what's called North Omaha, which is predominantly an African-American community, for several days afterwards. As a result, some of the basketball players are actually involved in some of these incidents, and that's written about in the book. Their home life is kind of built as a structure to then examine the city itself and where they live and how they come to the school and how they're worshipped as the basketball players. They are considered clearly the best team in the state as far as playing basketball, but as soon as they walk out on the streets, they've got other issues that they're dealing with in Omaha.
I say, well, actually, the book you're reading for Hoshaw will tell you a lot about how progress isn't necessarily linear, how change is a much more random and sometimes very grim process of advance and rollback and 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So we give students this kind of menu of search terms, And some of them are directly tied to Omaha. Others are more directly tied to a particular time period. Others are maybe more global. And so we thought we'd just keep it like 5 minutes, search, see what you find, see what Google spits back. Don't hesitate to throw in the occasional image tap, do the search and hit image to see what kind of pictures and maps fire back. And then we'll talk about what we found, and we'll show you what students do with it.
And it would be nice if not everyone started with the first 5, right? And you kind of grab things from different things.
In building this, how long would you say it took you guys to collaborate? And is it a living document that?
It's a living. This particular document is a living document. Honestly, I found the book. I heard about the book, went after it, shared it with Matt. Matt said, "Yes, let's do this." And so then I said, "Okay, I need a list of search terms." So the initial list, I would say probably at least 30 of the terms were. He just said, "Well, here's some things that we should do," and then we started building from there. And as far as assigning this, we don't collect anything from this. We ask the students to do this, and it gives them some guidance as opposed to just, hey, go search. And then in a couple minutes, we're going to ask you the same thing that we ask our students, which is, well, what did you find, or why do you think, what does this make you think about in conversation with Rhythm Boys that you read? That kind of stuff. And I'm sure many of you who teach the AP Lang course use the language of conversation, have the sources have a conversation with one another. I stole that from David Joloff's article from years ago, right? And I still use it. But I use it a lot when we do search terms like this because it's not about finding an answer. It's not about search the names in the book that you're reading. I ask them what's the conversation that occurs when you read this search term or these articles, this information, and you read this text. And then, of course, I get to break what Matt can't break, which is, and then look at today, or your community, where you live, how you're experiencing life in Omaha today. You get to be a part of that conversation as well. So I try to use conversation a lot so that they don't feel like they're looking for the answer. They're looking for something to contribute.
What's the enormity of this list? I mean, I'm looking at this list and I'm like, I do not know 90% of the things
I
on this
agree.
list.
That's why I have him.
And
Any history teacher could spit that list out pretty quick.
what's kind of cool about it though is, I mean, one thing I try to do with my Lane kids is just get them to care and like be curious about something, and to give them a list like this and to have them do what I just did, which is like, oh my God, I have no idea what this is. Let's look it up. I mean, like that kind of thing is what I want to foster in them, and I think this is a great opportunity for them to do that.
And that's where we're moving closer to the actual project and not just talking about, although I love this book, not just talking about this book. But that's really what we're hoping to foster in the students, is that ability to engage in an issue and a topic and realize that there are things they don't know and be excited by that instead of dismissive of what they don't know. Sports, and they've gone through this book to come to an idea of something that they want to know more about. And then we put them into groups. There are groups of usually 3 or 4, and they begin searching and building an actual pattern. We give them some specific measurements so that they build kind of a balanced, broad topic kind of thing, as opposed to finding a whole bunch of articles that say the same thing. So they do have to pull an excerpt from Rhythm Boys. It is the text that we started with. But then they get to start balancing what I want them to look at through AP Lang is the contemporary world, the world that they live in. Go find the news articles, go find the information about today, the city that they live in. But then you got to call back to history. You got to go back and find these relevant documents from at least 2 different historical time periods. And then we build in visuals and graphs and all that kind of stuff as well. So that they're trying to create a synthesis question. And it's exciting to me that they start to encounter that project from the flip side. I think the thinking they gain by searching through and finding how to build a question makes them better prepared to write and respond to a question, because they're no longer thinking about the sources as something being thrown at them by test writers who say, here, do this. They realize that they've had to think about so many things to come to the decision on the sources they use, that as they read a source on the other side, they start to think, well, what does this say about the topic? How can I create those conversations? What's the context that I can bring to this or connect to? Yes?
So when you do this, have you already unpacked a synthesis packet with your kids?
It's a great question. Yes. So they've seen a synthesis packet, and we've talked mainly about the components and how to read sources. At this stage, when they're building one, they may have done a practice synthesis time right, but we haven't done a graded synthesis time right. So yes, they've unpacked it and understand what it looks like before they have to try and build their own. And I think it's valuable that they write on one another's, but I don't think it's necessary that they write on one another's, because to me, the skills that they build up by creating it pays off enough. And then we can work with other synthesis questions or topics.
It might be really just interesting for the people who created it to see what they wrote, like not even for grading purposes, but for them to say, okay, now, what did they do here that we were not expecting? Or
and we build in essentially like a writer's workshop, a couple days of writer's workshop, but they're not composing essays, they're creating synthesis questions. And they do. I try to often pair them with a group that doesn't have the same question because they have different topics. But I can see how maybe those questions rhyme with one another, or there's something there that they could benefit by seeing the sources that this other group selected as well. And then there's a peer revision day where they're giving it to a group blind, and that group is trying to annotate as if they were doing the timed right, and then they give them feedback on this source really doesn't work, or I'm really confused by how to incorporate this one, or this was a great source, so you need to keep this one. So that is built into the process as well. But I think gives them some practice eventually for what they do for the national exam, because they're having to respond to someone's sources. Yes, a little bit more of kind of the process, and then we can continue to answer questions and talk about.
Yeah, we got about 5 more minutes of stuff.
How to use this in your own classrooms.
Plenty of Q&A.
One of the things that the students do struggle with is the whole idea of cutting a source down. Because they love this and they find it interesting, and they come to me with a stack of 9 sources and say, look what I found. And I'm like, that's great. What does it mean? How are you going to use it? So we spend one whole class day, or most of the class day, where I give them an article and I walk them through this cutting process, I call it cutting a source, of how you can take a full document, a full source, and what do you want to use it for? Like, what are the claims that are in it? How can you incorporate that cut into the source itself? How to use ellipses to make an effective but also honest cutting of the source and document itself. How do you go from, they get pretty discouraged, like, I found this great article, but it's 9 pages long. I know. You get to use a page of it and not just start to end, like, what do you want it to say? And so we talk a lot about identifying the claims, providing evidence, different types of evidence. Who are the voices in your packet? Does the source represent a voice that isn't already included in the packet? Those kinds of things. And so I walk them through and pull something from consent. Yes?
when you have them start to brainstorm their synthesis question, do they start with the question, or do they start with the sources? Or is it kind of an organic?
I want it to be organic. The reality is that's hard. And so what I don't start with the question. I start with I tell them the SOAPs, what they're interested in. So if they're, well, all this business about schools and where those district lines are drawn is really interesting to me. And I'm like, okay, so you're looking at the subject being, school district, like who draws those lines and what impact they have. Once they've determined the subject they're looking at, social, economic, political, then what are they really interested in? Go find the sources. Then I talk to them about writing the question. So I try to get them into the sandbox of the question, but not trying to word it yet, because that's really difficult. And then they word it after they've read their sources. Go find what's out there about it, and that will help you determine what the question is. Then I would say the other thing they struggle the most with is actually creating the cover page. And I made a template for it so they don't have to worry about formatting, but they still struggle with what should that introduction be like. And I would say we have a writer's workshop day where that's what we're doing. And I go around to the different groups, and they're trying to compose the background information, and then trying to word what a question should sound like. And so I give them a lot of samples of cover pages from previous exams, the manner and degree to which and the extent to, and we talk about that language, which again is helping them unpack for the national exam, but now they're thinking about composing.